So, and I don't know how much you know about Nick, but he's done AMAs before. You can find them on YouTube. So, being in Nick's shoes, he wants to talk about something slightly new, I would just guess.
I'm okay answering the same old questions, but new ones are more interesting.
Yeah, okay, exactly. So, like, whatever you have, give it to the go. And we'll think about something interesting.
I mean,
Don't be scared now.
More likely to be able to answer them if they're related to Ethereum or at least computer science in some way.
Exactly, exactly. And you will get a holder bag for every good question, or maybe every question.
I was just curious if you got inspired by some other maybe Bitcoin project, but I don't know if there's any Bitcoin name services.
So the first decentralized naming service was Namecoin, which was a fork of Bitcoin that it's explicitly tailored itself to doing naming. And I came across it about the same time as I was working on ENS, but I didn't draw a lot from it, other than the possibility to solve Zuko's triangle, which is basically have a naming system that's decentralized, secure, and human meaningful all at once. I think Namecoin made some interesting choices, but I think they underestimated the impact of squatting and so forth, and the need to design your economic system to try and mitigate that. Because people will always speculate on these things. They will always land rush and try and grab them up. And the unfortunate thing is there's a bit of a tragedy of the commons there, because the more people do that, the less useful the system is. And then, ironically, those very people are less likely to make a profit because the system's sort of stifled in its cradle. And a large part of what I'm trying to do with ENS is make sure that it has legitimately useful use cases from day one, that aren't speculation. So that's why we're starting off by resolving resolving Ethereum names, rather than trying to take over DNS or something from day one, because that provides an actual useful use case to anchor it and provide legitimate registrations straight off. Sorry,
No,
you moderate.
I thought you didn't see him. So.
It's a very boring question, but just thinking about the character in it. Well, now it has to be at least 7 characters. So, what's the goal there? How short a name will you be able to use?
So to elaborate, one thing I didn't expressly call out when I was talking about the current interim registrar is that the shortest name you can register is 7 characters long. And the reason for that is that we expected that the attention it got at launch time would be a lot less than the attention it gets in the long run if it's successful. And we didn't want every short name snapped up exclusively by people speculating on being able to sell it for more later. So we limited that, and with the intention of making those names available later. That will most likely happen when we deploy the permanent registrar, which is sort of about 12 to 18 months from now. And we haven't decided firmly on the new limit. I would guess that the lower limit will probably be 3 characters, because shorter than that starts to get a bit confusing. If you're i.eth, then it'd be cool, actually. But
that's a good name for an AI.
AI.eth, maybe. So, yeah, probably 3 letters. And the short ones will almost certainly be auctioned off in the same way that the first ones were, in order to assure reasonably fair distribution. I'm not a big fan of land rush type whoever clicks the button first gets it systems. By the way, questions don't all have to be related to ENS, although I'm very happy to answer ENS questions.
Can I ask you something else then? Why? Because you've been working at Google, which many people will kind of dream about.
Mm-hmm.
What did attract you to Ethereum?
For the first time in a long time, or possibly the first time ever in my software engineering career, I feel like I'm helping build something legitimately new and revolutionary. The comparison I keep making is, I imagine this is how people like Windsurf felt when they were building the internet in the first place. I don't pretend to compare myself to them in terms of skill, but I hope I'm as enthusiastic as they were. It feels like we're building something really cool and really new that legitimately breaks new ground. We're not building another chat site or the 50,000th internet dating site or video sharing site or whatever. We're actually doing things that nobody's been able to do before.
And do you think would you say that you have like any kind of values that that makes you attracted to that, or is it more like a innovational type of challenge?
So it's interesting. There's a really wide variety of ideologies that seem to be attracted to cryptocurrency. There's people who follow a libertarian mindset. There's people who follow a communist mindset that both see things in it for them in terms of building the economic system they want. There's people who, like myself, are more focused on the technology than the politics of it. Like, game theory kind of intermingles the two a bit, and I really love the opportunity to build incentive systems that, where the natural outcome is the one you want. But to me, it's an opportunity to build cool new infrastructure and technology that serves purposes that couldn't be done before, and I'm more or less happy to let other people speculate about what social systems will evolve out of it. I wouldn't build something if I knew its only use was evil, but to me, building good infrastructure is a goal in and of itself. So I just really like building new things.
You're very much an engineer.
Yeah.
Cool.
This could be a short AMA.
I was thinking one of the strengths or weaknesses, depending on how you see it, of Ethereum is that if you send funds to an address, you can verify what contract is on that address and be sure that your funds are going through this set of code. But if I'm sending something to an ENS name, what's to prevent someone from just changing where that ENS points to and redirect it to some other malicious code?
Yep, so that's a really good question. The easiest answer is that you can lock up ENS ownership of ENS names and where they point the same way that you can lock up any other contract. So you could write for yourself a resolver that only allows updates to where it resolves to with, say, a 4 of 7 multisig and 30 days notice, or not at all, or only if some number of users approve of it, and whatever set of rules you wish. So by default, the easy and simple resolver just points where you want it to, but you can impose the same set of restrictions as you can on everything else. Part of that is impeded a little at the moment because of the interim registrar. We don't know what the interface to the permanent registrar would look like, so it'll be a bit dangerous to lock up all control over a name, because then the migration time comes and you're like, well, I can't do this because I prohibited myself the ability to migrate the name. But we have interim solutions. I mentioned earlier the custodian, and the idea of that is that it won't let you do anything with the name, other than what your contract says, until we upgrade. And at the point we upgrade, you get control back. But you can sort of pre-commit. So when we announce the upgrade is going to be in 3 months and here's what the interface looks like, you can pre-commit by transferring ownership that when the upgrade happens, you can only do these specific set of actions. So we can't lock them up for all time now, but we can put some pretty solid restrictions in, and we can make sure that if anyone does want to change things, then all their users will know for at least several months ahead of time. So yeah, it's basically down to individual policy, just like regular contracts.
So who controls like the top level register?
Good question. So the root key for ENS is held by a multisig, a 4 of 7 multisig, with myself and a couple of others from the foundation and several other unaffiliated individuals. I think I can list at least 6 of the 7 names off the top of my head right now, but the goal in the long run is that we would like to replace that with a sort of a decentralized governance system, but we're aware that we want to be really conservative, because it locks up a lot of value, it locks up a lot of, provides a lot of security guarantees to have it stable. And we don't want to commit it to something that could be subject, say, to a hostile takeover with the purpose of, phishing everybody on Ethereum, which would kind of put the DAO to shame. So for now, it's a multi-sig. The participants and the number of them may vary over time, but our goal is to be very conservative, both in terms of how we change that over time and also what we do. So all the multi-sig participants have explicitly agreed to something that says basically we'll only intervene for technical upgrades that are largely uncontroversial and horrible disasters, and pretty much nothing else. So, yeah, that's all I can tell you.
The question is that how can you make dummy people to use ENS? What's your opinion?
So how can we make it usable for people who don't really know a lot about Ethereum, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, what's the
So the main way is better integration into wallets. My ideal onboarding for Ethereum is that you download some wallet and you do like an in-app payment of £1 and you get or 10 krona, and you get a trivial amount of ether, and it sets up a name for you. It says, what do you want your name to be? And then it creates an ENS subdomain for you, and it just works. You don't have to jump through any hoops at all. There's nothing more involved than a few clicks. We're sort of walking towards that with the ENS now. Give me a subdomain with one transaction, but that still assumes people can know enough to install MetaMask and buy some ether and so on. So basically, usability improvements and better integration with all the wallets.
just one thing is, for me is that when I just want to use the DNS security, I just see that HTTPS there's kind of green.
Yep.
Right? It's how, as I said, for DNS, I just want to also have this kind of stuff that people don't understand.
Yep.
Yeah.
So one of the talks at the ENS workshop was, and workshops discussed how to do that sort of assurance, and it was along the lines of building a program that specifies effectively how you have to control access to an ENS address, and then having contracts that you can commit the name to that restrict your ability to change it at short notice and provide some minimum security guaretees. And that if you adhered to all of that, then you could get the nice green tick in the browser or whatever. So it'd be the equivalent of like enhanced verification SSL certificate sort of thing. I'm not aware of anyone working on it actively at the moment, but it's definitely an idea on the drawing board. It's going to be a while before all of this is anywhere near as mature as Internet DNS, which has had 30 years to work with.
So suppose you could do something, warn users if it was changed recently or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, and that's something you can implement entirely in the client too. And more to the point, you could also warn whether the owner of the name has changed recently, as opposed to just where it resolves to. And we anticipate that with the permanent registrar for deregistrations, there would be a cool-off period too, so you couldn't forget to pay your rent and the next day a scammer snaps it up. You would have a long cool-off period during which it resolves to nothing at all.
So when you right now, if you want to register your own ENS address, you would need already Ethereum address, right? You would need a wallet.
Yes.
But what DNS did for the internet, it actually made it useful because you didn't need to memorize some IP address, and that was huge.
Yes.
And this can also be huge, but as an extension to the previous question, do you have on the roadmap on the horizon that you might actually start with ENS, not having an Ethereum address or wallet at all, and maybe creating it during the process of creating the ENS name?
Yep. So again, that mostly comes down to client integration. I know of a couple of clients that are working on improving this. Some of them already integrate sort of instantly purchase ether, APIs. And so with that, you can generate an account, you can click send me some ether. You never have to enter your address because it's all set up for you. You just how much, asks you how much, enter your credit card or whatever. And then with this integration, you could then go, okay, now I've got a bit of ether, I can afford to pay the 10p or £1 or whatever to get a name. And so through that whole process, you'd never have to enter an address manually. I know of one other client developer who's keen on taking that a step further, and actually they would register your name for you without any payment, and then they would set up the registrar so that basically the first £1 you receive goes to them to pay for the name. And the reason that's useful is because it solves the catch-22 where in order to pay to have a name you have to receive ether, and in order to receive ether you have to have a name, or
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering if you have any game theoretical challenges right now that you're facing, or if you had some that you might want to share.
Absolutely, yeah. From the ENS point of view, the incentivizing the auctions correctly so that we discourage squatting. Like the overall thing is that we want to make it as cheap and easy to use for legitimate registrants, which I define as anyone who buys a name so that other people can find resources with it, and as expensive and unattractive as possible for people who merely want to speculate on future value. So we've done what we can to sort of try and build that system, but it's far from perfect, and thoughts on better systems for that are always welcome, and that's why we're switching to rent instead of a deposit model. Likewise for the actual auction system, we use a Vickery auction, which is a blind auction, because the game theory of that is well understood, and it has the properties we want, which is that everyone's incentivized to bid what it's actually worth to them. But inevitably it's a bit complex because you have to make a bid and then you have to reveal it separately later, and these actions have to be timed. If you fail to reveal the bid in time, we actually can't give you your bid back, because if we did, you could there's a blackmailing or an extortion attack where I know you want to buy Vans.eth, so I don't know exactly how much you're willing to bid, so I put in a bid at 1 ether, 2 ether, 3 ether, 4 ether, all the way up to 100 ether, and then I wait for you to reveal your bid, and then I threaten to reveal a bid just below yours if you don't pay up. And if you don't pay up, then I can reveal that. It costs me nothing because you still win the name, but because it's a second price auction, you now pay way more than you would have if I had just been quiet. So in order to make that cost ineffective, we have to void any bids that are unrevealed at the end of the reveal period, and that's not a very user-friendly option for people who legitimately forget to, or their computer breaks down or whatever. So another game theory challenge is there another auction model that doesn't require that, or is there another way to structure the current auction model so that either that's not required or so that a third party can do the reveal without introducing additional complications. And I'm sure there was a third thing I had in mind too, but it slips my mind. Oh, the rent setting. So I talked about how, as a first approximation, we can monitor the rate at which names are deregistered and use that to set rent so that it's a stable rate. But if you only monitor deregistrations, somebody could pump the price down artificially by just registering and then deregistering hundreds of names, and we would count that as, look at all these people abandoning the system, emergency, decrease the price. If you just measure net registrations, both deregistrations and registrations, then you're effectively just enforcing a fixed growth rate. And so finding the right way to measure what to measure and how to feed it back to set the rent is another open problem. In fact, it's probably the most pressing one at the moment, because the other ones we at least have approximations for. So.
How will you adjust? You mentioned this rate, and that you paid maybe 0.1 Ethereum per year or something. Would you also adjust that price according to if the price of Ether goes up, or?
So the goal is to pick a metric that itself adjusts according to external factors like that. So if we could use just base deregistration rate, then you would expect that if the price of Ether skyrocketed, the deregistration rate would go up because people would find domains less affordable.
Yeah, okay.
So it would be nice not to do that, because there's really no way to monitor external Ether price other than oracles of some sort. Yes.
Yeah, one technical question. The current DNS is that we have the domain name, we have IPv4, IPv6.
Mm-hmm.
Is that possible to extend the DNS to not only connect to the address of Ether, also other address of coin?
Yes. So.
Can
So you mean resolve addresses of other cryptocurrencies? Yeah. Yes, that's absolutely possible. I demonstrated the simplest possible resolver on the slides earlier. You can rewrite that with a different function, which is Bitcoin adder, and it returns a string that is an encoded Bitcoin address, for instance. And all you really have to do is write a short standard document saying this is how Bitcoin addresses will be encoded, and then convince other people that it's not the worst idea ever. And then presto, you can now resolve Bitcoin on ENS, as long as there's client support somewhere. So it's intended to be very, very easy to extend in that way. I leave it to you to decide how many Bitcoiners would be happy to have a dependency on Ethereum in order to resolve names. I kind of want to ask all of you, what's a difficult technical problem you're dealing with at the moment, maybe related to the hackathon? If anyone has something they'd love to discuss.
I have questions that this is not the connect. Can I ask questions not directly? Okay. So in currently like in Go Ether, it's only have there's two proof work and also have proof of authority.
Yes.
Consensus. So what's the is there kind of map, like a roadmap to go to another?
So beyond those is mostly future proof of stake work. But the first version of proof of stake on Ethereum will be inside the chain as proof of stake on top of proof of work, and it won't actually require any changes to the client. When we migrate to full proof of stake, then Geth will naturally add that there, but that's still on the horizon. I'm not aware of any immediate efforts to add other consensus engines to Geth other than the existing two. Do you know of any, Martin?
No, there was some talk yesterday on Portal channel about having another unified testnet, but it seems unlikely that Geth will implement Boban, which currently uses. There's another name for that engine, it's called something Aurora or something. But there might be another consensus engine coming to experiment with some Casper stake stuff.
We talked a lot about this, more like in general about Ethereum, about ordering of transactions and like the limiting factor of miners being in this position of like reordering and like that this has some pretty serious consequences and things, and like if you could imagine something like Kafka or like a message queue system, like do you know of any systems like built on top of Ethereum to kind of address these like ordering issues? I'm not sure.
It's I'm not aware of any, and I think it's a very difficult problem to solve in general, because forcing miners to mine in a certain order would require some proof of when they received a certain transaction, and you can't really force them to prove to you that they got something at a certain time. They can always claim it was delayed or claim they never saw it and so on. So I'm not aware of any system that can mitigate that on a global scale, but I would love to get into the weeds and see whether we can come up with any ideas. The main solution for now is take that into account and architect your system accordingly to avoid big dependencies on transaction ordering where you can. As a broader overview, the issues broadly comes down to front running, but is even more broadly can be any sort of transaction ordering thing, because the miners get sole discretion over which transactions get included in a block and which order they get included in. So if a miner wishes, they can easily include a cheap or free transaction ahead of an expensive one. They can include one that was received recently ahead of an older one. They can even make up their own transactions on the spot and include them ahead of yours. So the front-running example is that you're working with some decentralized exchange. You send a transaction to buy some tokens, and they insert immediately ahead of that a transaction to buy the tokens first, which means you get a worse price, and the price goes up on the exchange, and then they can sell the tokens they bought right back, maybe even in the same block, and make an instant profit. And miners have a lot of discretion to do this because they have complete view over the blockchain. And although miners have the most power, users can even do this to some extent. You can monitor the pool of pending transactions. You can notice one that's subject to front running, and then you can publish your own transaction at a slightly higher gas price, which gives you a pretty good chance it's going to be included first. And there's no easy solution I'm aware of other than try and architect and design the game theory for things such that there's either no advantage to front running or no significant advantage, or it's overwhelmed by other factors. For instance, if you can set it up so that the amount you gain is less than the gas fees for conducting it, then obviously it's not going to be worthwhile.
Wouldn't this whole problem be solved by proof of stake?
No, because in proof of stake, stakers can still choose which order to include things in a block.
Okay, alright.
Yeah.
It's just that they have, there's the option of them losing their stake, but they still control the transactions.
They do, and they can only lose their stake for certain unequivocally evil options.
Incorrect transactions, but they still control the order, okay.
They do, yeah.
Alright.
Actually, probably not for incorrect transactions, because that would result in invalid blocks.
I thought that's the case where you would lose your stake.
And that's not the same as signing two incompatible valid blocks.
Contradictory.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's more or less up to the protocol whether it penalises people for signing invalid blocks. You could consider that to be a hostile action. But yeah, the main purpose of stake is to be able to void it if somebody equivocates and signs two valid blocks at the same height.
What about the ZK Snarks transactions? Would that solve the issue of ordering? Because they're going to be anonymous, right?
Yeah, it depends on the application. So if you think of the example of an exchange, you could theoretically come up with a ZK Snark that proves I bought some tokens. But I'm not sure you could actually build the whole exchange around that, because they have to know who you bought them off in order to give that person their money. So it's, in some cases, yes, it will, because it will make it more difficult. It will mean that the miner can't prove what you did at the time you did it. And you know, there are other similar solutions, like maybe you publish a commitment to a bid, and then in a later block you reveal what that was, and by that time it's too late for the miner to sneak something in ahead. And much like the auction case, you have to provide some sort of penalty for failing to reveal your commitment, and much like the auction case, that introduces gotchas for users if they or their software doesn't reveal it properly. So often, so far, things like that have been deemed to be more trouble than they're worth, you know.
I don't understand all the details, but when you use the CK Snarks, there's this trusted ceremony thing.
Yes.
Yeah, there was a paper out recently about something called bulletproofs, about another way of doing that, confidential transactions. I don't know if you've seen it.
So there's something called ZK Starks, which are a variant of ZK Snarks that don't require a trusted setup. I haven't heard of bulletproofs though.
Okay, yeah, I'll show the paper. I was reading it. It looked very interesting because they had found a way to. I think this was Bitcoin related.
Yes, I think it was Gregory Maxwell, the company who wrote it.
Yeah, I think I'm not an expert. I just read it through, but it sounded like they found a way to compact those proofs quite a bit, right?
Yes.
Would be something to look into.
Yeah.
I have a question. How do you think about incentivizing developers in the future for both Ethereum and
I think that's a really good question, because we've had a whole bunch of ICOs recently where the token really only exists to provide a way to raise funds to build the thing. Yes. And the thing itself doesn't really require the token, and I think with better ways to pay developers to build cool stuff, we wouldn't need those. There's things like Gitcoin and Commercieth, I think it's called, that are attempts to basically build bounty systems around solving GitHub issues and building code and so on. So ultimately that sort of devolves to the patron system or the Patreon system, where you have a whole bunch of people who are willing to contribute for something that may not give them immediate financial return but generates a common good. Beyond that, and the traditional thing of convince some company to sponsor you because what you're building is useful to them as well, I don't know of a good solution. I think it is going to be one of the biggest issues if we want to build an open system. We don't want to just build a whole lot of closed ecosystems, walled gardens. Then finding a way to incentivize people, or not even so much incentivize, is just to be able to pay their rent would be a good start. To build new protocols that aren't encumbered and aren't needlessly complex and dependent on some arbitrary token. We're going to need better ways to do that, and I'm going to be actively exploring that, because the ENS Foundation is going to be a non-profit. It's going to be funded by members' dues for people who want to be part of the standard setting organisation, and donations from companies who I hope are looking forward to using ENS and have raised $200 million in a crowd sale or something. But in terms of long-term sustainability, we're going to need to be on both sides of that. We're going to have to find people who are prepared to say, yes, I'm prepared to chip a bit in to help improve standardization here. And also on the other side, going to have to be able to say, we will give 1 ether to the first person who writes an ENS library for a platform that didn't have it before, for instance.
But do you think that is one of the main reasons why Ethereum has been much more innovative since the ICO or whatever, in comparison to Bitcoin? Because at least Ethereum had some amount of money to spend on developers.
Yeah, I guess I do. Both the Ethereum Foundation hiring developers, but also the ICO craze leading to a lot of developers with more money than they really need,
Yes.
and a lot of time to build stuff. Some of the teams I'm most excited about, I think they're building really cool infrastructure, but I also don't think their token has a purpose. And
Which projects are those?
I'm not going to name names in front of everybody, but I want to see the tech get built, and this may not be the ideal way to build it, but the end result is good at least.
I don't know what you think about Tesos, but I heard that they have some kind of feature where if you build an improvement like a big for Bitcoin, that you can somehow get paid if that gets implemented.
So they have a developer fund, which is a popular feature in new coins now. So instead of having a pre-mine and some of it goes to a foundation, you have it paid out gradually over time into a developer account, which can then be awarded using some sort of decentralized decision-making process. It's pretty much up to whoever owns the keys to that process to determine.
It's not really implemented in the...
It's not implemented in code. I mean, otherwise I could write the everybody should give me some money BIP, and they would. But yeah, I actually think that's a good idea. Like if Ethereum was launched today, I think it would be reasonable to say that, 1% of mining proceeds go into a fund that helps pay for further development on the platform, and that all the coin holders get some vote on where that money goes. Although you do again have the possibility of somebody just acquiring a coalition of people who have enough money to say we should get it all.
And one last question: what would you give the Bitcoin people as an advice for the next years
It doesn't matter what I say; they're not going to listen.
No, but I guess you also have. But I guess you have some. Maybe spend some time thinking about Bitcoin's problems as well with the.
I
ideal
think,
world if they would listen to you.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that the Bitcoin versus Ethereum thing, the way the communities are different, comes down to how they were originated. Bitcoin was built to be internet money, and it was built to be basically feature complete from its first release. And as a result, its community is very conservative about technical changes, overly so, I would say, and is unwilling to do anything that even risks imperiling their original vision. Even if stasis is bad, then it's easier to achieve than change. Whereas Ethereum was explicitly conceived with the idea that the launch day Ethereum would be a pale shadow of what was to eventually become, and that feature upgrade hard forks would be routine and so on. And so as a result, we've seen effectively no resistance to the idea of we should hard fork to add some new features. So I think a lot of it just comes down to how each community started, and I think once you've got that entrenched with those facets, it's pretty much impossible to change at this late stage. And I think it's unfortunate that Bitcoin's scaling gridlock has become such that it seems unlikely it's ever likely to sufficiently innovate from here. Any innovation will have to be on top of the platform, and that means that even things that would be hugely beneficial to Bitcoin adoption, like being able to do a two-way peg, so you could lock up Bitcoin in another system and then use that system to release the Bitcoin, which, for people that say Bitcoin is digital gold, that seems like a gold class feature to me, to be able to actually bank with it, effectively without off-chain. But even things like that are never likely to be adopted because they're far too radical for the community to accept. So I don't think there's hope.
But this developers funds, so the ENS fees that you might be burning, couldn't you turn those into a development bounty fund?
Yeah, so there's two aspects here. One is the rent is economically necessary to build the system we want. So if you had no rent, then there would be no reason not to register every name under the sun. And we don't want to get into a situation where the rent becomes higher because that brings in more money rather than because that's the best for the system. But I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. I think you can be a good steward of the system, even if there's a financial incentive there, especially if you've got some independent feedback loop setting the price. The second question is whether what troubles come along with it. So I was speaking to some lawyers yesterday, and it seems at least plausible that in a system like ENS where there is no consideration, so nobody is being paid for selling an ENS domain, from the system and so on, that there's no contract, which means that ENS itself is just a distributed automated system. It's about as effective to try and sue as trying to sue a vending machine. But that if you introduce a rent where the rent goes to an organisation that then receives it, then suddenly that organisation is now the counterparty to every domain purchase, which means that they're suddenly, fiscally responsible for everything. And that certainly complicates our lives, and I don't want to spend all our money on fighting stupid lawsuits.
But that's going to be a problem for pretty much any way that you get money into a development fund.
It is, yeah. I would like to be able to use that money to help pay people to make ENS better. And I'm hoping that we can do that without either legal issues or too much contentiousness, because there are people who would rather not see it spent on that or spent at all. I mean, saying we should burn money is actually, ironically, always less contentious than saying we should give it to X, because somebody will always object to the specific choice of X. And the other thing is we'll have income from members' dues and hopefully from contributions from companies that want to help ENS evolve. So we hopefully won't be dependent on that as a source of income. Shall I take one or two more? I guess people should probably get back to hacking at some point.
Yeah, two more. I have also one question.
Okay, so one there.
I just thought it was an interesting idea if X was random, but I don't know how you would get hold of random addresses. Like if you just started portioning out this money to random accounts.
Like mining fees, you mean?
Oh.
Yeah, you can do airdrop type stuff where you hand it out proportional to people's balances or how many ENS domains they own or whatever. When I first started working on forming the ENS organisation, I wanted to form it as a co-op and give back excess registration fees to the registrants. It turns out that and being a non-profit organisation are actually legally incompatible. You can't give people money and be non-profit. Or at least not in this particular scenario. So that was, yeah.
British laws or?
British law at least, yeah. And it depends, you can be a charity who takes money from one group of people and gives it to another. But if you have people purchasing something off you and then you give some of it back, you're basically acting like a company giving out dividends, and suddenly they want to talk to you, really badly. Okay, so...
Yeah, ENS is really it's a system for making Ethereum more accessible. You can say that, yes.
Yep.
So, what do you think are more challenges ahead for Ethereum? Because I guess everybody who in blockchain and Ethereum, we want to make it broader accessible. So, what challenges are ahead for making it broader accessible to more people?
I see two major ones, which classes that cover just about everything. One is onboarding. It's a real pain, as most people here probably know, to get cryptocurrency in the first place, especially the first time. Okay, now sign up here, now submit a photo of your passport. No, you have to be holding the passport. Oh, and today's newspaper, and a letter saying, my name is blah and I want to buy some ether. And, now send us, your firstborn, and so on and so forth. So anything that improves that is going to help. And there's always going to be KYC issues and so on with larger amounts. But I think about how easy it is to buy travel money, and I think it should be equivalently easy to buy smaller amounts of cryptocurrency, and I think in time it will be. I think the second issue is integration with existing web technologies. Ethereum and others are very siloed at the moment, And if we want it to be adopted incrementally rather than as some sort of massive revolution, then we need to build systems that integrate better with existing systems, so that you can, use your web browser to go to a site and it just works. And I think things like MetaMask and Infura and so on are really helping with that. So if you want to make cryptocurrency easier, then either of those two things are a good idea. And the second one doesn't require a banking license, which is nice. How many more questions can I take?
Oh man, you have a lot of questions. So who hasn't asked a question at all? And has a question? You have a question? Okay.
Yeah, I was, since you work with names, what do you think of the current Ethereum address format?
It's a bit of a mess.
It's just like a hexadecimal.
Yes, it is the simplest possible address format, and I sincerely wish they had adopted a checksum in it when they did.
Yeah.
And to my understanding, it was mostly an assertion. It was mostly an assertion by Gav Wood that we didn't need it because we'd have a naming system. So I guess I'm helping, but I'm a year too late. Basically, I think it should have had some sort of built-in checksum from day one, because there's really no reason for it to be this easy to typo. We have a form of checksum through different capitalization of the letters in the address, and it's now reasonably widely adopted, but the issue with it is that when you enter an address into something, you don't know whether it worked because you got the checksum right, or it worked because it doesn't support checksums, and that's not a great situation to be in.
So that is why you sometimes get the address with different capital and lowercase letters.
Yep, that's a checksum built into the address, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And it's bolted onto the address would be a better way of describing it. Yeah.
So there's one eager fellow there.
Okay.
Just one last thing. What do you think is the best way for developers to make money out of Ethereum and smart contracts without choosing, say, an ICO or something like that? Like, is it even possible to build a business model on a smart contract, or is someone always just going to fork that smart contract and remove the fee or whatever it is?
I think that anything that relies on network effects is far more likely to be successful. So a decentralized exchange like EtherDelta has a much better chance of not being forked, for instance, because it's as useful as the number of participants it has, and therefore you're facing an uphill battle to establish your own new version of it. And that goes for other things, like there's this fun little one somebody's working on at the moment called CryptoKitties, and it's a digital collectible type thing with, random genetic mutation evolving kitties and so on. And the thing about it is, again, that it relies a lot on the network effect because people trade with each other and so forth. So systems like Bancor, for instance, are going to have trouble retaining their hegemony because they're very easy to clone, and the network effect is mostly sort of external to their system, whereas things like EtherDelta are going to make it a lot easier. And I like this balance for things like that, because it keeps them honest. Like if they were to rack up their fees really high, then it would become quite easy to get people to move off to another system. But as long as they keep it reasonable, then it's below the switching cost, and they can continue to make money, and people can continue to have a useful service. One last question.
Yes, I was thinking about what you think about like bigger companies like Google, for example. Can they do something, since you have experience with both actually? Do you think they can do something for the blockchain without being Google's blockchain?
I think larger organizations are always going to have a natural advantage anywhere because of the amount of resources they can throw at it, but I'm optimistic that organizations like Google will, or that systems like blockchains are harder to sort of wall in to build an exclusive area in than other systems, because they naturally run towards transparency and make it easier for competing systems and cooperation and permissionless innovation, which I think is my favourite aspect of the web in general. So time will tell, but fingers crossed.
Why haven't we seen more of the big companies adopt blockchain in some sense, or haven't heard even them putting any work into it or any money? Why?
So there's a lot of adoption of enterprise stuff with some companies, Microsoft, IBM, and so on. The Enterprise Ethereum Alliance has a large number of large companies behind it now, but they're mostly interested in consortium chains and so forth. I think a lot of it is a natural caution towards anything that seems like an innovative financial product, because with that comes regulatory risk. And so I think it will take a while before governments decide what's up with blockchain, and therefore it becomes more stable and safer for more companies to get into. And I think a lot of it will happen on private chains, because they see the advantages of the tech, but they don't want to expose everything to the public chain. And hopefully things like Plasma will make that interaction between different types of chains easier. Cool. You should all get back to coding.
Cool. Resume coding.